In the far southwest of Europe, long before Rome rose, long before Greece built its first temples, a great kingdom glittered along the edges of the Atlantic, a land filled with gold, silver, and secrets, a civilization so wealthy, so strange, and so powerful that ancient writers compared it to a legend. This was Tartessos, Europe's forgotten civilization, a kingdom that appeared suddenly in history and then vanished just as quickly, leaving behind myths, ruins, and puzzles we still cannot fully solve. But who were the Tartessians? Why did their cities shine like no others in the ancient world? And what force wiped them from the map almost overnight? Today we uncover the rise, the glory, and the mysterious disappearance of Tartessos. 1. A civilization hidden in the edge of the world. To the Greeks, the far western edge of the Mediterranean seemed like another planet, a place of storms and mountains and rivers that carried metal in their waters. When Greek explorers arrived around the 8th century BC, they reported something astonishing. A wealthy kingdom, a sophisticated culture, a people unlike any they had ever seen. They called the land Tartessos, and they described it as a place where the sun sets into the sea. The kingdom was centered near the mouths of the Guadalquivir River, in what is now southern Spain, a region rich in copper, silver, and gold. But what the Greeks found was more than a mining culture. Tartessos had palaces, metal workshops, writing systems, and trade ports connecting them to the entire Mediterranean. In fact, some historians believe Tartessos may be the first true civilization of Western Europe. 2. A land overflowing with gold and silver. Ancient writers spoke endlessly about Tartessos's wealth. The river, they said, carried silver dust in its waters, mountains glittered with ore, and Tartessian kings controlled the metal trade that fueled early Mediterranean economies. The most famous ruler was King Argantonius, whose name literally means the Silver Man. Greeks claimed he ruled for 80 years, lived to be 120, and welcomed foreign traders with astonishing generosity. Some ancient sources say he even funded the rebuilding of Greek cities thousands of kilometers away. Was this true? We cannot be certain. But archaeological evidence shows Tartessos really did control some of the richest mines in the ancient world, especially the legendary Rio Tinto mines. With metal came power, and with power came culture. 3. A culture that thrived on the boundary between worlds. Tartessos sits at a crossroads of civilizations. They blended local Iberian traditions, Phoenician technology, and Mycenaean and Greek influences. Their art is strange and beautiful, shining gold jewelry, bronze plaques carved with mysterious symbols, and stone statues that hint at a complex religious world. One of the greatest discoveries is the treasure of El Carambolo, a stunning collection of gold jewelry weighing more than 2 kilograms. Its craftsmanship suggests elite rulers, wealthy priesthoods, and sacred ceremonies dedicated to gods still unknown to us. Tartessian writing also appears in carved stones and pottery. It is one of the oldest writing systems in Western Europe, but it remains only partially understood. A complex culture, a wealthy kingdom, a vibrant port civilization, and yet, in the span of one human lifetime, it all disappeared. 4. The mysterious collapse. Around 500 BC, Tartessus vanished from history. Not declined, not weakened, vanished. Greek sources simply stopped mentioning it. Phoenician records go silent. Archaeological layers show abandoned cities and burned settlements. What happened? Scholars offer several theories, but none fully explain the mystery. Theory 1. A catastrophic war. Some believe Tartessus fought a devastating war against the expanding Carthaginians. The Carthaginians, eager to control Western Mediterranean trade, may have destroyed Tartessian ports and choked its economy. Theory 2. Natural disaster. Others point to the region's seismic instability. A massive earthquake or tsunami, possibly related to the same fault lines that triggered past Iberian quakes, could have wiped out low-lying cities. Some even suspect Tartessus might be connected to the legend of Atlantis, though this remains highly speculative. Theory 3. Internal collapse. A society dependent on elite families, mining wealth, and trade partnerships may have fractured from within, especially as foreign powers shifted the balance of the Mediterranean. 5. The rediscovery of a forgotten kingdom. For nearly 2,000 years, Tartessus was considered a myth, a story repeated by Greek writers but lacking evidence. Then, in the 20th and 21st centuries, everything changed. Archaeologists uncovered monumental buildings hidden under farmland, elite tombs filled with gold, fortified settlements along ancient rivers, and inscriptions written in Tartessian script. Most astonishing of all is the discovery at Cancho Roano, a ritual complex with altars, offerings, and perfectly preserved architecture. It proves the Tartessians were more than traders. They were a kingdom with ceremony, religion, and structure. Piece by piece, the forgotten puzzle is being reassembled. Six. Why Tartessus still matters. Tartessus is more than a lost civilization. It is a reminder that European history is far older, richer, and more diverse than we once believed. It shows how cultures grow through contact, how ideas flow along rivers and coastlines, and how stories survive long after cities disappear. Today, Tartessus stands at the border between myth and history, a kingdom of gold and mystery, a civilization that bridged the ancient Mediterranean and Atlantic, a people who shaped Europe before Europe even existed. And as we continue to dig, literally and historically, we may yet uncover the full story of the kingdom where the sun set into the sea. This is Tartessus, Europe's forgotten civilization, a kingdom lost for millennia, but no longer lost to us.
Imagine a place older than the pyramids, older than the first cities, older than farming itself. A place built 12,000 years ago, at a time when humans were still hunters, gatherers, and wanderers of the wild. And yet, in the middle of this ancient world, they built something impossible. Massive stone circles, carved pillars weighing tons, and symbols that still defy our understanding today. This is Göbekli Tepe, the site that rewrote history and raised a question that challenges everything we thought we knew. Did civilization begin far earlier than we ever imagined? When German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt first walked across the barren hilltop in southeastern Turkey in 1994, he noticed something strange. Fragments of carved limestone, broken tools, pieces of ancient pillars peeking from the soil. Local farmers believed the hill was just a natural mound. Schmidt realized it was something far greater, something world-changing. As excavation began, the sand and earth revealed a sight so extraordinary it stunned the archaeological world. Beneath the hill were huge circular temples, built from stone pillars up to 6 meters tall, arranged with mathematical precision. Each pillar was decorated with animals: lions, snakes, foxes, vultures, boars, carved in exquisite detail. These carvings were not random. They seemed symbolic, ritualistic, almost like a message from a forgotten world. Here is the part that shook every historian. These structures date back to around 9600 BC. That means Göbekli Tepe is 7,000 years older than the pyramids and 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. Before this discovery, the story of civilization felt simple. First agriculture, then villages, then cities, then monuments. But Göbekli Tepe flipped the timeline upside down. These temples were built before farming, before settled life, before the first city ever existed. So if hunter-gatherers built this, how advanced were they really? One of the most baffling mysteries is the engineering. These pillars weigh up to 20 tons. They were quarried, shaped, transported, and lifted upright, all without metal tools, wheels, or domesticated animals. To move each stone, dozens of people had to work in perfect coordination. This required planning, leadership, communication, and a shared belief powerful enough to unite entire groups. In other words, civilization-level organization. Long before civilization. Another mystery is the purpose of Göbekli Tepe. No signs of everyday life were found. No houses, no hearths, no crash pits. It wasn't a village. It wasn't a city. It was a ceremonial center, a place of gathering, a sanctuary built by people who traveled long distances to reach it. Some researchers believe this site was used for rituals involving death and rebirth. The carvings of vultures and headless bodies suggest a symbolic belief system, perhaps the earliest known religion. Others believe Göbekli Tepe was a meeting place, where scattered tribes gathered for festivals, rituals, and the strengthening of social bonds. And then there is another theory, a bold one that could rewrite history again. Maybe these gatherings led to something revolutionary. Agriculture. Farming didn't create temples. Temples created farming. Think about it. If people met here regularly, they needed food. They needed stability. This pressure could have pushed humans to begin domesticating plants and animals for the first time. Instead of farming leading to religion, religion may have led to farming. If true, Göbekli Tepe is not just the first temple. It is the birthplace of civilization. But the mysteries do not end here. There is even a stranger question. Why was Göbekli Tepe buried? Around 8000 BC, the people of the region deliberately covered the entire site with thousands of tons of debris. They didn't abandon it. They preserved it, protected it, buried it carefully, layer by layer. Was it to protect a sacred legacy? Was it part of a ritual? Or was there a threat, a natural disaster, climate change, or an enemy that forced them to hide their sacred place? We still don't know. As excavations continue, new findings reshape the story. What we see today is only about 10% of the entire site. Beneath the ground, ground-penetrating radar reveals dozens more structures waiting to be uncovered. What secrets lie beneath the hill? What symbols? What stories of the world's first builders? Göbekli Tepe is not a completed mystery. It is an awakening. The people who built this place lived at the end of the Ice Age. They saw mammoths disappearing, new animals rising, and the climate warming rapidly. They experienced a world in transition, just as we do today. And yet, in their struggle to understand the universe, they built something eternal. Stone temples that survived 12,000 years. Symbols carved in rock, a legacy hidden beneath the hill until our time. Today, Göbekli Tepe reminds us of something profound. Human history is deeper than we imagined. Civilization did not begin in cities. It became in the mind, in belief, in the desire to create meaning. Long before Egypt, long before Mesopotamia, a forgotten people carved their story into stone and left it for us to find. And the question they leave behind still whispers across 12,000 years. Who were the builders of Göbekli Tepe, and how much more have we yet to discover?
Please like and subscribe to ERA by ERA.
Imagine waking up to find your world on fire, your cities collapsing, your kings defeated, your entire civilization wiped out by enemies who appear from the sea like ghosts. Over 3,200 years ago, this wasn't a story. It was reality, and the people responsible were known by one terrifying name: the Sea Peoples, a mysterious coalition of warriors who appeared seemingly out of nowhere and brought the greatest civilizations of the Bronze Age to their knees. Around 1200 BC, the ancient world was thriving. Egypt was powerful. The Hittites ruled an empire from Anatolia. Mycenaean Greece was building palaces that still stun historians today. Trade routes stretched across the Mediterranean like arteries feeding a global economy. And then, almost all of it collapsed. Entire empires vanished, cities burned, writing systems disappeared, populations fled. For decades, historians asked the same question: who destroyed the ancient world? The earliest evidence appears in inscriptions from the Hittite Empire. Kings urgently write to their neighbors, "Send grain, send troops, we are being attacked from the sea." These attackers didn't come alone. They came as whole nations, men, women, children, an entire migrating force armed for war. They attacked ports, burned towns, and cut off supply lines. To the Hittites, the Sea Peoples were a nightmare that came with fire. The Hittite Empire, once one of the Mediterranean superpowers, collapsed almost overnight. Their capital, Hattusa, was abandoned and burned. Their records end abruptly, as if history itself stopped writing. All that remained were ruins, and the warning: they came from the sea. This is the part that has puzzled historians for centuries. The Sea Peoples were not one tribe. They were a mixture of groups: the Shurden, Shekelesh, Peliset, Luca, Denyen, Tieker, each with their own culture and weapons. But where did they come from? Three main theories exist. Climate disasters forced whole populations to migrate. Massive earthquakes destroyed cities across the eastern Mediterranean. Internal rebellions and collapsing economies pushed people into piracy and conquest. But none of these alone explain the coordinated, devastating wave of destruction they brought. After destroying the Hittites, the Sea Peoples turned toward the great Mycenaean kingdoms of Greece. Palaces like Pylos and Mycenae were burned. Trade collapsed. The Greek world entered a dark age that lasted centuries. Then came the most famous clash of all, their attempt to conquer Egypt itself. In the 8th year of Pharaoh Ramses III, word reached Egypt a massive coalition of sea peoples was marching south and destroying everything in its path. Ramses III prepared Egypt like never before. He fortified the Nile Delta. He positioned archers along the riverbanks. He prepared traps for the enemy ships. Then the invaders arrived, not as raiders, but as a migrating army with ox carts, families, and entire nations behind them. This was not a raid, this was an invasion. Egypt's inscriptions proudly record what happened next. The Sea People sailed into the Nile Delta, right into Ramses' ambush. Arrows rained from both sides. Egyptian ships rammed the invaders. Bodies filled the water. In a brutal and legendary battle, Ramses III claimed victory, stopping the Sea Peoples from conquering Egypt. Even though Egypt survived, the rest of the Bronze Age world did not. Major cities from Turkey to Greece to the Levant were burned or abandoned. The trade economy that had connected the ancient world for centuries had collapsed. Trade routes gone, palaces fallen, writing systems forgotten, population reduced. A world of empires became a world of ruins. What makes the Sea Peoples so haunting is that we still don't know exactly who they were. Were they climate refugees? Warriors seeking new lands? Displaced tribes from collapsing regions? Or descendants of kingdoms wiped out by earlier disasters? What we do know is this: the Sea Peoples were a symptom of a world already cracking, but also the force that shattered it completely. After their attacks, the ancient world entered a dark age. But from those ashes rose the civilizations we know today. The Greeks, the Phoenicians, the Israelites. The collapse of one world became the beginning of another. The Sea Peoples remain one of history's greatest mysteries, a ghost army that changed the world and then vanished forever. But their legacy lives on in the ruins they left behind and the new civilizations that rose from the ashes. Imagine standing on the frontier of the ancient Near East, where endless deserts meet fertile valleys, and where caravans carried silk, gold, and the ambitions of kings. In this vast landscape, a new power rose from the east, a power Rome tried again and again to destroy, yet never conquered. A power that humbled Roman generals, dominated the Silk Road, and shaped half the ancient world. This is the story of the Parthian Empire, Rome's forgotten rival. The Parthians did not begin as emperors. They began as wanderers, nomadic tribes from the steppes of Central Asia. To the Greeks, they were barbarians from nowhere. To the Seleucid kings ruling after Alexander the Great, they were a minor nuisance. But history often turns on the ambitions of those the world underestimates. Around 247 BC, a Parthian chief named Arsaces rebelled, declaring independence. Few noticed, fewer cared. Yet within a few generations, his descendants built an empire stretching from the Euphrates to the mountains of Afghanistan, a realm that would endure for nearly 5 centuries. Parthia's strength came from 2 pillars, its geography and its warriors. The empire sat at the heart of the Silk Road. Anyone traveling between Rome, India, or China passed through Parthian lands. Wealth poured into their cities. Taxes, trade, and diplomacy shaped their power. But their armies made them legendary. Parthian horse archers were unmatched, fast, precise, and deadly. They mastered a tactic that became world famous, the Parthian shot. A horseman would pretend to flee, twist backward in the saddle, and fire an arrow with lethal accuracy while galloping away. What looked like retreat became a trap. Supporting them were the cataphracts, heavy cavalry armored from head to toe, horses included. They charged like living battering rams. Against this combination of speed and armor, even Rome struggled. And Rome did struggle. In 53 BC, Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Roman history and one of the 3 rulers of Rome, invaded Parthia seeking glory. He imagined an easy victory. He imagined himself another Alexander. But he marched into a land he did not understand, against an enemy he could not predict. On the plains near Carrhae, Crassus met a Parthian army led by General Surena, a brilliant commander, a nobleman of immense charisma, and a master of cavalry warfare. Under burning sun and endless sands, the 2 worlds collided. The Roman legion stood in tight formation, heavy, disciplined, slow. The Parthians attacked like a desert storm. Arrows fell in black waves. Cataphracts thundered across the field. And every time the Romans advanced, the Parthians vanished, firing backward with deadly precision. It became one of Rome's greatest disasters. 20,000 Romans dead, 10,000 captured and marched east, never to return. Crassus himself was killed in a failed negotiation, his dream of glory dying with him. Reflective, slow. News of the defeat shook the Mediterranean world. Rome, the master of Europe, had been humiliated by an empire many Romans barely knew existed. And Parthia was not finished. They invaded Syria, threatened Roman provinces, and supported Caesar's enemies during Rome's civil wars. The rivalry became a centuries-long struggle, a silent Cold War that sometimes burst into full flame. Calm but intense. Rome tried again under Mark Antony. He marched east with one of the largest armies ever sent against Parthia, more than 100,000 men. But Parthian horse archers and harsh desert terrain shattered his campaign. Disease, ambushes, and endless skirmishes forced him to retreat with massive losses. Another Roman disaster. Another Parthian triumph. Smooth, informative. Yet Parthia was more than cavalry and battles. It was a fusion of cultures, Persian, Greek, nomadic, and Mesopotamian. Its cities thrived on trade. Its kings ruled through alliances with noble families. Its art blended Greek realism with Eastern decoration. And its diplomacy controlled the flow of silk from China to Rome. For centuries, Parthia shaped world commerce. But every empire faces its twilight. Internal rivalries between noble families weakened Parthian unity. Rebellions flared. Kings rose and fell in rapid succession. And on their southern frontier, a new Persian dynasty waited, the Sasanian Persians. In the early 3rd century AD, the Sasanians rebelled, led by Ardashir. Unlike earlier challengers, he won victory after victory. Parthia, weakened by internal conflict, could not resist. In 224 AD, the last Parthian king fell, and a new Persian empire rose. And so the Parthian Empire ended, not in collapse, not in conquest by Rome, but replaced by another Persian dynasty that admired Parthian traditions even as it reformed them. Epic closing tone. Yet for nearly 500 years, Parthia stood between Rome and the East, controlling trade, shaping conflict, and redefining cavalry warfare. They defeated Rome's greatest armies, they humbled its most ambitious generals, and though history often forgets them, the Parthians were one of the most powerful forces of the ancient world. This was the Parthian Empire, Rome's greatest rival from the East, and an empire that refused to be conquered.
Imagine a world before Egypt built its greatest pyramids, before Babylon soared, before Persia, Greece, or Rome even existed. Now imagine an empire so ambitious, so unprecedented, that it stitched the world's first multicultural superstate together, from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. This is the story of the Akkadian Empire, the first empire in human history, created by a man born a nobody, raised in secrecy, and destined to become a legend. And just as quickly as it rose, it collapsed in one of history's greatest ancient mysteries. This is how humanity built its first empire, and how it was lost. Before the Akkadians, Mesopotamia was a patchwork of city-states: Uruk, Lagash, Kish, each ruled by its own king, each competing for water, farmland, and influence. These cities spoke different dialects, worshipped their own gods, and fought endless territorial wars. And yet, hidden inside this unstable landscape, something extraordinary was about to happen. The founder of the Akkadian Empire, Sargon, began not as a prince, but as an orphan. An ancient inscription claims he was born to a priestess, placed in a basket and set afloat on the Euphrates River, found by a gardener, raised as a commoner, and eventually appointed as cupbearer to the king of Kish. Sargon rose from nothing and then took everything. With charisma, military skill, and an unstoppable drive, he overthrew his king and seized power. But he wasn't done. He had a vision no one before him dared to imagine: a single ruler over all of Mesopotamia. Sargon launched campaign after campaign, each one more daring than the last. He conquered Uruk, humbled Lagash, and marched across Sumer. His new capital, Akkad, became the beating heart of a rising empire. For the first time in history, the region was ruled as one political unit, a true empire. Sargon's genius wasn't only military. He created a centralized government, placed trusted officials in key cities, and linked territories with a communication network backed by royal authority. He standardized weights, he standardized trade, he made Akkadian the language of diplomacy and administration. This wasn't just conquest, this was statecraft. Under Sargon and his successors, the Akkadian Empire flourished. Merchants traveled from Anatolia to Oman. Caravans moved metals, textiles, oils, and luxury goods. Cities expanded. Art and sculpture reached new complexity. The empire even documented astronomy and produced some of the world's earliest literature. Akkad was becoming a cosmopolitan center, pulling in ideas and wealth from every corner of the ancient world. And then came the empire's greatest ruler after Sargon, Naram-Sin, the God King. Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin, inherited an empire at its peak. He crushed rebellions, expanded borders further than Sargon himself, and claimed the title King of the Four Corners of the World. His victory over the Lulubi tribes was immortalized in the famous victory stele, where Naram-Sin is carved ascending a mountain like a god. Under him, the empire reached maximum power, but the seeds of collapse had already been planted. After decades of glory, something strange began happening across Mesopotamia. Cities were abandoned, irrigation canals dried up, harvests failed for years, the great rivers shrank. This environmental collapse may have starved the empire from within. And in the middle of this crisis, the empire was struck by constant rebellions. The Gutians, a mountain people, raided Akkadian lands relentlessly. The empire fractured. Akkad itself vanished so completely that modern historians still don't know where the city truly stood. But the great question remains: what caused the collapse of the world's first empire? Historians have proposed several theories. 1. Climate disaster. Clay tablets reveal a period of severe drought. Rainfall declined for years. The great rivers shrank. This environmental collapse may have starved the empire from within. 2. Overexpansion. The empire grew so large that rebellions erupted constantly. Resources were stretched thin. The administration could not maintain control. 3. Gutian invasion. A confederation of tribes from the Zagros Mountains repeatedly attacked. They didn't build cities, only plundered. Some historians argue the Gutans delivered the final blow. 4. Internal strain. Power struggles, local rivalries, and weakening leadership destabilized the empire over generations. Most likely, it was all of these combined, a perfect storm. By around 2150 BCE, the Akkadian Empire, once the greatest power on earth, collapsed. Its cities diminished, its language slowly gave way to Sumerian revival and later Babylonian dominance. Its emperor's titles were reclaimed by new dynasties. Akkad, the empire's shining capital, disappeared so completely that it became a legend. An empire that united the world vanished from it. But the legacy of the Akkadians lived on. The idea of a unified empire, the model of a central government, standing armies, provincial governors, imperial communication networks, all became blueprints for later civilizations. Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Rome, and even modern states. The Akkadians didn't just build an empire, they built the concept of empire. More than 4,000 years ago, a child set afloat on a river rose to build the first empire in human history. Its fall was sudden, mysterious, and total, but its influence shaped every great power that came after. The story of the Akkadian Empire isn't just a tale of rise and fall. It is the beginning of all imperial history, the first chapter of how humanity learned to rule, shape, and connect the world.
Before the pyramids, before Babylon, before Rome or Greece, there was a forgotten land where humanity built its first true civilization. a place where people invented writing, created cities, engineered canals, charted the stars, brewed beer, wrote epic literature, built the first schools, and shaped every society that came after. This is the story of the Sumerians, a mysterious people who rose from the mud of Mesopotamia and changed the world forever. 5,000 years ago, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers was harsh and unpredictable. Floods arrived without warning, scorching heat baked the soil, and survival required both creativity and cooperation. But instead of giving up, a group of people turned this chaotic landscape into the birthplace of civilization. Their name was Sumer, and their achievements are so advanced that historians still call them the people who invented everything. Our journey begins in Uruk, the world's first major city. By 3500 BC, it was home to tens of thousands of people, an astonishing number for the ancient world. Towering walls, gleaming temples, and bustling markets turned Uruk into humanity's earliest urban experiment. Here, for the first time, people lived in organized neighborhoods, worked specialized jobs, traded goods from distant lands, and used a centralized government to keep order. To control the chaos of this growing society, the Sumerians needed a new tool, something revolutionary. Around 3200 BC, scribes in Sumer pressed wedge-shaped marks into soft clay. This system, called cuneiform, is the earliest known writing in human history. At first, writing was used to manage trade, grain shipments, taxes, livestock counts. But soon it transformed into something much greater: laws, stories, hymns, mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and the first recorded literature. Writing allowed knowledge to survive beyond a single lifetime. Civilization, for the first time, had memory, and humanity would never be the same. To manage their complex society, the Sumerians formed some of the earliest cities with structured governments. Each city-state, Uruk, Lagash, Kish, and Eridu, was ruled by an enzi, a governor, who coordinated trade, water distribution, and defense. Above them stood temples dedicated to powerful gods like Inanna, Enlil, and Enki. Temples owned land, stored food, employed workers, and acted as both religious and economic centers. The idea that leaders should maintain justice, manage resources, and protect citizens, concepts that form the basis of modern governments, began here. Sumer's landscape offered challenges, but the Sumerians turned them into advantages. They dug massive irrigation canals, drained marshes, and built controlled waterways that allowed farming to flourish. Their engineering was so efficient that Sumer became one of the first regions capable of producing surplus food, fueling population growth, trade, craftsmanship, and education. They also invented the plow, the wheel, and early forms of mathematics to measure fields and taxes. Because they lacked wood, stone, and metal, the Sumerians built a huge trade network reaching deep into Anatolia, Iran, the Indus Valley, and the Persian Gulf. Caravans carried textiles, grains, and pottery outward and brought back copper, gold, tin, precious stones, and exotic goods. Sumerian merchants traveled along newly formed trade routes, pushing human interaction farther than ever before. This was the beginning of international economy, and Sumer was its beating heart. The Sumerians wove their beliefs into every aspect of life. Their myths influenced later cultures for thousands of years. They believed gods created humans from clay to serve them, and that each city-state was protected by a divine patron. These stories were preserved in clay tablets as some of the oldest literature ever written. From this tradition came one of the greatest works in human history, the Epic of Gilgamesh, a tale of kingship, friendship, heroism, and the search for immortality. Its themes appear in later myths from the Bible to Greek epics, proving that Sumer storytelling shaped the world. Sumerian scholars studied the stars, tracked the movements of planets, and developed calendars for farming and religious rituals. Their most famous contribution was the sexagesimal system, a base 60 mathematical system. Thanks to the Sumerians, we have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and 360 degrees in a circle. They developed early geometry, accounting systems, and medical texts describing diseases and treatments. These ideas built the foundation for science, astronomy, and mathematics across the ancient world. In many ways, the Sumerians were surprisingly modern. Children went to school, called tablet houses, where they learned writing, math, and law. Families lived in mud brick homes with kitchens, courtyards, and shrines. People held festivals, played music, used board games, and brewed large amounts of beer, which was considered cleaner and safer than water. Their daily routines, recorded in thousands of clay tablets, revealed the earliest glimpse into organized human society. Despite their achievements, Sumer's cities constantly competed for power. They built walls, raised armies, and fought for control over water and farmland. One of the earliest recorded battles in history, the Battle of was fought between rival Sumerian cities. The world's first historical king lists, battle reports, and treaties come from this era. These conflicts eventually weakened Sumer, opening the way for new powers to rise. By 2000 BC, climate change, invasion, and internal conflict destabilized the Sumerian world. A new empire, the Akkadians, followed by the Babylonians, absorbed their cities. But Sumer did not disappear. Its inventions became the foundations of every civilization that followed. Writing, cities, taxes, schools, math, laws, literature, irrigation, astronomy, government, the building blocks of human society. The Sumerians started it all. Today, when you look at a clock, read a book, write a number, or walk through a city, you're witnessing the legacy of a civilization that rose from the mud 5,000 years ago. The Sumerians may be gone, but their influence is everywhere. They were, in every sense, the civilization that invented everything.
In the heart of Mesopotamia, between the Tigris River and the endless plains of northern Iraq, a civilization rose that would redefine power, warfare, and empire. This was Assyria, a kingdom so formidable, so feared, and so innovative that historians today call it the world's first true superpower. But the story of Assyria is not just one of conquest. It is a story of resilience, a story of rise, fall, and rise again, and a story of how a small city on the riverbank became the beating heart of a vast ancient world. The beginning of Assur. The Assyrians began as traders, not conquerors. Around 2500 BCE, their earliest city, Assur, grew rich on caravans moving tin, textiles, and metal across Mesopotamia and Anatolia. They built colonies, wrote contracts, and developed one of the most advanced merchant systems of the ancient world. But Assyria's geography offered something more. Open land for horses, iron-rich hills, and a perfect position between rival powers. Over time, merchants became kings, and kings became conquerors. The birth of a war machine. Assyria's transformation began in the second millennium BCE. Kings like Shamshi-Adad I united lands from Syria to the Persian Gulf, but it was during the Neo-Assyrian period, beginning around 900 BCE, that Assyria reached a level of organization and military power the world had never seen. The Assyrian army was the first professional standing army in history. Not farmers who fought when called, not seasonal militias, but trained soldiers, full-time, disciplined, and backed by a state built for war. They created specialized units, infantry, cavalry, archers, slingers, sappers, and the devastating war chariots that became Assyria's signature. They also mastered siege warfare, battering rams, movable towers, tunneling teams. Assyria turned fortress breaking into a science. Other kingdoms built walls. Assyria built ways to destroy them. The Age of Expansion. Under kings like Ashurnasirpal II, Assyria expanded with terrifying speed. Ashurnasirpal built a new capital at Kalhu, decorated with monumental art, winged bulls, and reliefs showing military triumphs. His campaigns reached as far as Lebanon's cedar forests. Rebels were crushed, cities were resettled, lands were reorganized under Assyrian governors. For the first time, an empire was not just conquered, it was administered. This system, roads, provinces, taxation, military stations, became the model for every empire that followed. Shalmaneser III and the Battle of Karkar. One of the great turning points came in 853 BCE at the Battle of Karkar, where a coalition of Middle Eastern kingdoms tried to stop Assyria's rise. Despite their united strength, the coalition failed. Assyria proved what everyone already feared. Its military machine was unstoppable. But the empire was not yet at its peak. Tiglath-Pileser III, the engineer of empire. In the 8th century BCE, a brilliant and ruthless king appeared, Tiglath-Pileser III. He reformed the army, reorganized the provinces, and created direct rule over conquered lands. He resettled populations to prevent rebellion and expanded the empire into Iran, Syria, and even the borders of Egypt. He didn't just expand Assyria. He rebuilt it into a machine that could last generations. The empire reached its zenith. Then came Sargon II, Sennacherib, Esarhaddon, and Ashurbanipal, some of the most powerful kings in ancient history. Sargon II built the magnificent capital of Dur-Sharrukin. Sennacherib conquered Babylon and expanded Nineveh into one of the largest cities of its time. Esarhaddon captured Memphis in Egypt, making Assyria the first Mesopotamian empire to rule the Nile. Ashurbanipal, the scholar king, created the Library of Nineveh, preserving thousands of clay tablets that still shape our knowledge of the ancient world. At its height, Assyria controlled an empire stretching from the Persian Gulf to Cyprus, from Egypt to the mountains of Iran. No earlier civilization had ruled such a vast, diverse, and interconnected region. A superpower built on order. But despite their fearsome reputation, the Assyrians were also great builders and administrators. They developed advanced roads, postal systems, aqueducts, and engineering projects. They built gardens, temples, and monumental palaces filled with detailed stone reliefs. Their ark captured moments of war, hunting, religion, and life. This was a civilization of complexity, not just conquest. But even superpowers fall. Assyria grew overextended. Endless campaigns drained resources. Vassals rebelled. Enemies united. In 612 BCE, the Babylonians and Medes formed a coalition and marched on Nineveh, the greatest city of its age. After a brutal siege, the walls fell, the palace burned, and the Assyrian Empire, after centuries of domination, collapsed almost overnight. Their last forces retreated to Haran, then vanished into history. The legacy of Assyria. Yet Assyria never truly disappeared. The idea of empire they created, provincial rule, logistics, roads, standing armies, siege engineering, administrative control, became the blueprint for Persia, Rome, Byzantium, and countless states after them. The symbol of the winged bull, the libraries, the cuneiform records, the engineering, all reveal a civilization far more advanced than its reputation as merely brutal conquerors. Assyria was a force that reshaped the ancient world, a civilization that rose from trade, transformed through war, and created the foundations of imperial power for thousands of years. This was the Assyrian Empire, the world's first great superpower, and one of history's most influential civilizations. For more than 700 years, the ancient world was defined by one struggle, a rivalry so massive, so enduring, that it shaped the map of 3 continents. This is the story of Rome versus Persia, 2 superpowers locked in an eternal contest for dominance. On one side stood Rome, the empire of legions, roads, and emperors, a civilization built on discipline, law, and military might. On the other, Persia, first the Parthians, then the Sassanids, masters of cavalry, kings of kings, heirs to centuries of imperial tradition. Where Rome expanded westward into Europe and Africa, Persia ruled the great heartland of the East, the crossroads of Mesopotamia, Iran, Arabia, and Central Asia. Together, they would fight more than 70 major wars, exchanging victories and defeats, but neither ever destroying the other. Why? Because Rome and Persia were evenly matched, each strong where the other was weak, and that balance created one of history's greatest power struggles. Rome began as a city-state on the Tiber River. By the 1st century BCE, it conquered the Mediterranean and crushed its rivals. Persia's story was older, reaching back to Cyrus the Great and the Achaemenid Empire. But by Rome's rise, it was the Parthians who ruled the East, horse archers, noble clans, and swift armies. The first clash came in 53 BCE, when Roman general Crassus invaded Persia hoping for glory. Instead, he met disaster at Carrhae. At Carrhae, the Parthians unleashed a tactic Rome had never faced. Mounted archers circling endlessly, firing arrows with terrifying speed. Behind them thundered the cataphracts, armored cavalry whose charges shattered infantry lines. The Roman legions, heavy and slow, were trapped in the desert. Crassus was killed. Nearly 20,000 Roman soldiers fell. It was one of Rome's worst defeats. And it sent a message. Rome might dominate the West, but Persia ruled the East. For the next centuries, the 2 empires stared at each other across a narrow frontier. Armenia, a kingdom caught between giants, changing sides whenever survival demanded. Mesopotamia, rich and fertile and strategically vital. Syria, Rome's eastern shield. Wars erupted again and again, not for survival, but for advantage, prestige, and power. Under Emperor Trajan, Rome launched its greatest offensive. By 116 CE, Roman armies reached Ctesiphon, the Persian capital. For a moment, Rome controlled Mesopotamia, the closest anyone came to actually conquering Persia. But the victory was fleeting. Revolts broke out. Supply lines stretched too thin. Rome withdrew, never again attempting full conquest. The lesson was clear. Persia was not a land easily held. And in the 3rd century, a new dynasty rose in Persia, the Sassanids. Organized, ambitious, and proud heirs of ancient Persia, they dreamed not just of survival, but of reclaiming former glory. Their king, Shapur I, crushed Roman armies, even captured Emperor Valerian alive, a humiliation Rome would never forget. The rivalry intensified. New walls, new forts, new armies built across the frontier. Neither side could afford to appear weak. From the 4th to 6th centuries, the conflict evolved into a Cold War with bursts of open battle. Rome, now the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantium, relied on fortified cities, heavy infantry, and diplomacy. Persia relied on cavalry, elite warriors, and centralized control under the King of Kings. They fought for Armenia. They fought for Mesopotamia. They fought for trade routes. But they also traded, negotiated, and even cooperated when necessary. This was not hatred. It was geopolitics. In the early 600s, the rivalry exploded into its greatest and most destructive conflict. The Persian king Khosrow II launched a massive invasion, conquering Syria, Palestine, and even Egypt. For a moment, it looked like Persia might finally crush Rome. But Emperor Heraclius led a daring counterattack deep into Persia itself. Battles raged from the mountains of Armenia to the plains of Mesopotamia. Rome triumphed. Persia collapsed into civil war. But victory came at a terrible cost. Both empires were exhausted, taxes drained, armies depleted, and into this vacuum rose a new power neither had expected. In the 630s, the Arab armies of the early Islamic Caliphate surged outward with astonishing speed. Persia fell completely. Rome lost half of its lands. Two ancient giants that had fought each other for centuries were swept aside in a single generation. The clash between Rome and Persia shaped the borders, cultures, and religions of the world we know today. Their wars carved the map of the Middle East. Their diplomacy influenced Europe and Asia. Their rivalry gave rise to fortresses, roads, and military traditions later used by countless empires. Rome and Persia never destroyed each other, and that is what made their story legendary. Two superpowers, two civilizations, two visions of the world, locked in a struggle that defined an age and changed history. This was the epic rivalry of Rome versus Persia, the ancient world's greatest contest of power.